I'm a boundary bitch. Like, I am big on my boundaries. I love boundaries. I've considered writing a book about boundaries. I've read books about boundaries. I love boundaries.
Welcome back to Full-Time Yoga Teacher Podcast. My name is Reika and I am your host. If you are a returning listener, thank you so much for coming back to listen to this episode. And if you are a new listener, I want to say welcome. So this Full-Time Yoga Teacher Podcast was created about a year ago. I wanted to interview other full-time yoga teachers out there in the world, not only in my small circle of community, to hear about their journey of how they got to where they are and share their journey and their challenges and their wisdoms so that I can share their journeys with you, the listeners. Because when I first started working as a full-time yoga teacher, these are the kind of conversations and informations that I wish I had, so it can inspire me to continue working towards becoming a full-time yoga teacher. And just know that there are other people out there that's making this work to teach yoga as their primary source of income. And what's so interesting about doing these interviews and sharing these interviews is that everybody has their own unique path and their own unique way of making this into their full-time living. And I think that's so fascinating and also beautiful because it doesn't have to look one way. I also do interview part-time yoga teachers as well as people who work in yoga-related job but may not be teacher necessarily. So I hope you find these conversations interesting and informative, maybe even inspirational. Yesterday, we had our hands-on workshop with Ali as part of my mentorship program for yoga teachers, and it was so much fun. Ali always makes handstand and trying something new and maybe slightly scary into a really fun thing. And she also offers so many great tips and tricks and all the drills. So I really appreciated that in-person experience, but I also love that we were able to Zoom people in from different time zones, and there are still recording available if you still want to purchase the recording, watch the recording, and kind of do the workshop at your own time from your own home. I'll put the link of that workshop on the show notes if you're interested. I do have a few announcements for those who live in Long Beach or near Long Beach. I am hosting a 3-part series workshop at Alter Society, which is a brewery, local brewery here located in downtown Long Beach. And myself and my colleague Carlos, we led a workshop a couple months ago there. It was yoga and sound workshop. Carlos is amazing sound facilitator, so he plays sound live music throughout the yoga class that I was teaching, and he finished us off with beautiful sound bath at the end. So we are going to continue to work together and also work with Alter Society. So there's 3-part series coming up. So once a month from March, April to May, we're going to be teaching a workshop on Sundays. So the first workshop on Sunday is March 16th from 11 a.m. till 12:15 a.m. at Alter Society in downtown Long Beach. And this workshop is to celebrate spring equinox. And the next one is on April 6th. This one is to celebrate the solar eclipse. And the May 11th Sunday, we're going to be celebrating the full moon as well as Mother's Day. So these are the 3-part spring yoga and sound series. If you want to purchase all 3 tickets, there's some discounts. If you want to come to one, you can just come to one. But these workshops are happening on Sundays from 11 to 12:15. And the first one is March 16th. So that's in a couple of weeks. If you purchase a ticket to this event, you also get 20% off at the brewery. Whether you want to get a coffee, tea, beer, or lunch, you'll get 20% off your bill if you purchase the ticket and come to this event. If you came last time, or maybe you saw some of the photos I posted, the space is beautiful. It's on the 3rd floor of this old building located in downtown Long Beach, and it had this high ceiling with natural light coming in, beautiful wood floor. It almost feels like an old church. So if you want to experience practicing yoga with live music and beautiful sound bath, I highly recommend coming to this 3-part series workshop, even if you can only make it to one. I'll put the link to these events on the show notes if you want to give it a look and see if you want to make it. And that's all the announcement I have for today. So this week I interviewed Johnny La Pasta. And Johnny and I know each other from working at the same yoga studio, Raw Yoga in Long Beach, for quite some time. But we know each other, we pass each other by between classes, but we never really got to have a deep conversation with one another. So this was a great opportunity for me to get to know him and share his journey, his life, but also what are all the things that he does to make this into a full-time living. I want to welcome you to our conversation I had with Johnny La Pasta. He is a yoga mindfulness instructor known for his creative flows, thoughtful themes, and even occasional sing-along and dancing that happens in his class. And with over a decade of experience, Johnny has taught in a variety of settings, working with diverse clients while staying committed to making yoga more accessible and sustainable. In this episode, we dive into his journey from discovering yoga as a kid to make it his full-time career, the challenges of teaching in post-pandemic world, and how he made a switch from 9-to-5 full-time corporate job to be where he's at, a full-time successful yoga teacher. And we also discussed about why setting boundaries is so important, and it's also a key for longevity in this industry. So let's get started with this week's episode. Welcome, Johnny, for coming on to the podcast, Full-Time Yoga Teacher Podcast. And I'm so excited that I get to have this conversation with you today. So tell the listener, how are you doing? And also, where are you joining this conversation from today?
Well, firstly, thank you so much for having me, Reika. I am so honored that you asked me, and I'm so excited to be having this conversation with you and connecting with you a little bit further than we've been able to connect in the past. I am doing well today. There's a lot going on in the world, so I am trying to be a vessel for the light amongst the dark. But personally, where I'm at right now, I'm doing well. It's been a good day, and I am coming to you around the corner from you in Long Beach, California. I'm at home and you're at home, and we probably could have even done this in person, but it's always best to do it over Zoom with the mic situation.
Yes, definitely. Since you also have experience with podcasting, I think you know I've tried to do in person once before with Ali G from Raw as well. And just sound wasn't as great in person. Maybe we tried to use one mic between two of us, so that could be the reason. But yeah, there's all these tech things that I'm not an expert in, and it makes it easier to do it online for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I've been there too. I've done the exact same thing with Sam Parks, actually, who teaches with us. We did a interview together and we just handed the mic back and forth, kind of like a red carpet style interview. And it made the editing process a lot harder because there was like that dead zone between every question and answer where the mic was getting handed over. And, you know, sometimes one of us would start talking as the mic got back to us. So that would be kind of like quiet for a few seconds till the mic was fully in front of our mouths. And I think you really need like a full 2-mic setup, like in a studio situation, to do that. Otherwise, this Zoom format works out really well.
Yes, I agree. Okay, so I'm actually really excited to chat with you today because I have known you for a long time and we always cross paths and we have a lot of mutual friends and we say hi, but I don't know your story and I don't know your yoga teaching path that led you to where you are today. So I'm very excited to get to know you. So maybe start with telling me and the listeners, how did you first get introduced to yoga?
So I first got introduced to yoga through my mom. I got it from my mama for real. I'm very much my mother's son. She has always been a yogi as well as just a spiritual person who was interested in meditation and Eastern philosophy and all of that. And she used to do you remember Brian Kest yoga? So she used to do his VHSs in our living room. And when I was about 12, 13, 14, there would be times where I would just throw a mat down next to her and start doing the class with her. And that was really my first experience with yoga. So it was really her who introduced me to it. And then she would also take me to different meditation classes throughout high school. So I was kind of always had a foot in that world. And then when I was about 19, that was when I decided, okay, I am going to start going to a yoga studio. I had been kind of inconsistent with the practice. Again, it was like I was just doing it with my mom. And then as I got older and was more independent, it was like I'd maybe do some yoga stretches sometimes, but I wasn't doing it consistently. And at 19, I was like, okay, I want to find a different way to move my body. I'm going to start going to a studio. So I got like a 2-week intro offer to a studio, went every single day, and I really fell in love with the practice in a deeper way. And for me, which I know is the experience for a lot of people, went beyond the body. The body was the entry point for me of, I want to move my body in this different way. So I went to yoga, but I ended up staying and coming back for more because of the messages, the themes, the intentions that were being brought in by the instructors. And I really resonated with those messages and those themes. And I was finding that they were organically influencing how I was thinking, how I was behaving, how I was acting. Little backstory, not backstory, but little tidbit of info. At that time of my life, I was going through a hard time and I was kind of an angry person at that point. And yoga was really helping me deal with that anger in a much more healthy way. That really got me hooked in the practice. And from there, I became really consistent. And then I did my first teacher training when I was 22, a few years later. And I've been teaching in some capacity ever since.
Wow. So I love that you were like exposed to yoga, meditation from your mom at such a young age, because I'm sure during that time, it wasn't as popular as it was now, or it is now. I think it's interesting when you can get that experience from such a young age, and like also seeing your mom practice it, I think has such an influence on you as a children, just watching your parents or somebody close to you practicing it and meditating and practicing yoga. And I was curious to know about, the question I had was, before you started practicing the yoga asana more regularly and daily, did you have any, other movement practices or like sports you played or dance? Because I feel like a lot of people that I interview, a lot of yoga teachers happen to be like dancer in the past or gymnast in the past. So I'm just curious if you had any other movement practice or background before finding yoga to be your main practice.
Yeah, that's a good question. I had a lot of different styles of movement going on for a while there, kind of like middle school through early high school. I did martial arts, actually. I have a black belt in something called Hapkido, which is a Korean martial art. I don't really remember any of the moves now, but I do have the black belt. I'm sure it's buried deep within there, but I did that, which does almost have, some of the movements had some of like a yogic quality to them, and there were yogic stretches as part of that. But then I did a lot of musical theater as well, so there was dance as part of that. And then about the time where I started going more consistently to the studio, I'd also really taken up running and weightlifting and those sorts of things as well. So I was always doing some type of movement, but yoga's my favorite one.
I had no idea you had a black belt. That's amazing. And people who have martial art background, I feel like, I don't know, because I don't have a martial art background. I did do karate when I lived in Japan for like 1 year, maybe even less than 1 year. I didn't go beyond white belt.
Okay. You got the basics in there.
Yeah. But I feel like people who've done martial art, who also practice or into yoga, what I've heard them say is that there's a similarity in like a philosophy behind it, as well as maybe this sense of discipline and practice. There's a commonality there with martial arts and yoga.
Absolutely. And I think, that is prominent throughout a lot of the Eastern traditions and practices, that there's an emphasis on presence, an emphasis on connection to a power or a lightness within that you then pull out of you. There's an emphasis on finding that flow state and then the discipline factor, and not in a restrictive sort of way, but in a having some boundaries and some parameters to work within is a healthy thing. So I think that is all kind of there. And you see that in all the martial arts traditions, whether it's Kung Fu or karate or Hapkido or Taekwondo, and then all the different lineages of yoga that we have. So yeah, that is actually a really interesting observation.
And I know you took teacher training, your first one when you were 22.
Mm-hmm.
Remember what, it doesn't have to be one moment, but it could be a period of time. But when you actually realize that I want to become a yoga teacher.
That's a really good question. I think I knew I wanted to do it prior to entering teacher training, or when I signed up, I knew I wanted to do it. And at the time, it was more of I was in college, and it was more of the thought of I could teach yoga part-time as a way to give back. And I really want to share the magic of the practice that I've experienced. And it could be a side job in my early years of my career. And that very much was what it was. It very much was that way, rather. And then I didn't ever envision myself doing it full time, but here we are. And I love it. And I'm so happy with it. But there was a point in the training, I think maybe about week 4 or 5, where we started doing practice teaching and teaching each other in small groups. And I taught a little part of the sequence that we were learning. And I just felt like I was in that flow state, so to speak. And I felt really locked in and really empowered. And I realized, oh, wow, I really could do this. And it is something that I obviously ended up doing.
And tell me a little bit about your 200-hour experience. Did you enjoy it? Did you feel ready afterwards to teach? And also, how long was your program? Some are intensive, some are over a couple of months. So maybe a little bit more about your teacher training experience.
Yeah, my teacher training experience was amazing. I did it in 2013. It was 8 weeks. So that meant Saturdays and Sundays, and then we had 1 weeknight day, which I believe was Wednesday nights. And then obviously you're required to take a bunch of classes and workshops, and that all kind of adds up to your 200-hour. I was the only guy in the training. It was me and a bunch of my girls, and it was such a kind group, a very connected group. I'm still friends with a lot of them to this day, and we had amazing leads. David Miller was our head teacher in that. I don't know if you cross paths with him, but he is an absolutely amazing teacher in the area. I've learned so much from him. So yeah, I did feel prepared when I graduated. I felt ready to lead a very beginner, basic class. But I think a lot of the preparation comes from learning on the job. If you teach a class, we could do this better, or maybe if I said it this way, it would resonate more. And I think you really just learn through experience.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I remember when I first graduated 200-hour and I started teaching right away, and I started teaching at gold gyms. Realized that, oh my God, not everyone can step forward from down dog, or not everybody can do down dog. So although I felt ready from that 200 to start teaching, but I just realized that there's so many different people out there that what I learned in 200-hour wasn't enough. I didn't know how to change my sequence in a way that didn't include down dog at all, or chaturanga at all, or what if some students couldn't get up from the floor, things like that I have to learn from experience much, much later. But I think 200 is supposed to be an intro, the minimum you need to become a teacher. So I think from that time, from graduation, I think many teachers continue to learn and train and gain more experience as we start teaching.
100%. And I agree with you there. I think maybe a good way of saying it is that I think our 200 hours, it sounds like it got us ready to teach a beginner class in a studio setting where students are coming for that and may already have that sort of base of understanding of those yogic movements. Then when you get thrown into a setting where maybe someone hasn't done yoga before and they're not ready for those kind of movements, that is a little bit of a curveball, but hopefully you've learned enough about the body through the training that you can think on the fly and come up with those sort of modifications of, oh, okay, we're going to a runner's lunge. Let's do it from the top of the mat where we step back, so it's not so much of an issue to step forward and things like that. But yeah, I think a lot of that is on the job. And similar to you, I started teaching at gyms right away. And my first class out in the wild after graduating, I had 8 people. None of them had done yoga before, and 5 out of 8 of them only spoke Spanish. And I do not speak enough Spanish to instruct. So it really was, I got thrown to the wolves, but we made it work. So we got through it.
Oh, that sounds amazing. I want to know about that transition. So like coming out of 200-hour, like you said, you started teaching right away. I want to know like what kind of places you taught? How were you subbing at first, or, did you have a full schedule right away? So what was that transition period of after teacher 200 hours into kind of becoming teacher?
That's a great question. So I started teaching at gyms right away. And then the studio that I trained at also offered continuing education. It was called Extensions. It was like another 50 or 75-hour training that kind of took you a little bit deeper. So I did that training pretty much right away after graduating. And after I did that, I was qualified to teach at that studio. And I got a placement for a beginner class. So I had 1 or 2 classes a week. And it kind of stayed like that for a while, where I was teaching at that studio, sometimes a gym, just 2 to 3 classes a week for a couple years. And, during that time, I progressed and I tested out to be able to teach more advanced classes or intermediate classes and move away from just the beginner classes. But I was working full time. So kind of simultaneously as I graduated teacher training, I also got my first like adult corporate job. I was a social media intern or assistant at a big company. And so I kind of was doing both side by side. I was working 40 hours a week, 9 to 5, and then I was teaching 1 or 2 classes on the side. And as the years went on, I ended up bringing the yoga and meditation into the corporate setting, where I was leading team building classes as like a HR benefit for the company and doing little meditation classes for my marketing team for stress relief. And that experience really trained me how to kind of customize yoga and meditation or translate those modalities in a way that is accessible in a corporate environment, which is now kind of a section or a sector of my career, is doing corporate wellness stuff. So that was kind of like my first introduction to that.
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. I want to actually ask you more questions about that. So what you said, around the same time you graduated from 200 is also the time you got your first full-time job. So that was after graduating from, I know you said you were in school, college, and you thought that teaching yoga can be like the part-time thing you do. So you kind of graduated college and got a job right away?
I actually hadn't graduated college yet. I was a super senior. So I was a 5th year senior, and I had just a handful of credits to finish. So it was a busy time, right? I was working full time. I was taking maybe like 8 to 10 units for those last 2 semesters. And so I had like some night classes and things like that. And then I was also teaching 2 to 3 classes a week. So it was definitely a busy time. It's definitely something I could have only done being 22 or 23 years old. But yeah.
I know you said you got a job as a social media person. Was that did you have experience in that before, or was that kind of part of your training or a degree?
Yeah, so I was going to school for writing, and within that, there's copywriting and all of that. And I had a food blog with a friend, and through that, there was a lot of content creation around food. And that was kind of how I landed. I was with a casual dining company, and it's a national chain. So I worked at their corporate office and got the job doing their social media, kind of building it from the ground up, because that was really when like Instagram was first introduced and becoming, what it eventually became.
That's amazing because I would imagine that experience and skill set you gain from that job, I'm sure, is very helpful as a full-time yoga teacher.
Yeah. 100%. That's why, I think for anyone who's listening that kind of thinks like, oh, my journey hasn't been linear and it's taken me all over the place and it doesn't fit into some of the narratives that I hear out there. Every part of your journey teaches you something, and there's something valuable that you glean from each step in your journey. And for me, I was in digital marketing for restaurant companies for a number of years, and that definitely was not my calling. It was not my passion. That's why I eventually left it when I realized that. But it did give me a level of stability that I needed at that time of my life to really build myself up in other areas of my life so that I could eventually make the leap that made sense for me. And so many skills that I learned from working in that world translate to my work today. Just project managing programs, obviously the corporate wellness stuff, and being able to have that sort of like corporate lingo for when I work with companies, social media management and marketing. All of that is still with me today, just in a different capacity, but I wouldn't have those skills if I didn't have that time.
Yeah. So I would love to know, like you say, you took the leap to leave the corporate world to kind of pursue what you love. So I'm sure that wasn't an easy, like, day and night switch. And I think a lot of listeners listening, they are probably in your similar shoes as you, of like, they have another job and they want to make teaching yoga into a full-time thing, or maybe a bigger part of their lives.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people are so curious about how somebody like you made that switch or the leap. And so I'm curious to know about that transition. How did you go from teaching a couple classes a week and also teaching some meditation for your company, and also working full-time 9 to 5 with that company, to kind of taking that leap to kind of deciding to become a yoga teacher?
Yeah. So the way that transpired, so I was with that first company, which was a big national restaurant chain, for 4-ish years. And then I left that company to go to another restaurant company that was a smaller company, Southern California based, but I had a higher role in that company. It was a climbing of the ladder, so to speak. So I went to that company. I was at that company for a year, and that was a year of immense learning about myself and revelations. And that company, I have to say, I haven't said the names of any of these companies. First company was great. I could totally say their name, and it'd be totally fine. This other company was a very toxic workplace. So I won't throw them under the bus, even though I kind of want to. But it was a toxic workplace. But because it was a toxic workplace, it really made me start to think about, what do I want to do from here? Do I just go find a similar marketing job at another company? Or is it also the job itself that is no longer in alignment for me? And that was really what I uncovered, was that this type of job is not for me. I actually did interview with another company, did get offered another job that was a pay raise and all of that. And I just kind of thought, you know what? This is going to be the same shit at a different place. Even if that company had a healthier mindset, I just knew I didn't want to do that job anymore. And not to say that that is a bad job. If some people love to be in marketing and they feel creative and empowered in those roles, that's wonderful. It just wasn't for me. I was finding that I really wanted to see the impact of my work in real time. And the only place I'd ever experienced that was teaching yoga and teaching meditation. As you well know, we get to see our students have breakthroughs in the practice. We get to hear the feedback of how the work has helped them and see their transformations. And it's very rewarding. And I felt like I really want to do more of that. And I'm also creative. I'm a writer. I want to have more time to write. So from there, I was like, okay, I need to make the jump. How is that going to happen? Then it was announced at that company I was at that there was going to be layoffs across all departments. And so I went to my boss and was like, I'm not happy here. The other guy that works here is, and I knew it was between me and this other guy. I was like, he loves his job, needs his job. I want out. Please lay me off. Like, let me go. This is my exit. So I kind of voluntarily got laid off, and that gave me that push out of that corporate nest that I needed. And so from there, I acquired a bunch of classes at a variety of studios that just happened to be available at the right time. And that was the start of that era. So from there, once I left the full time, I was teaching maybe 6 to 8 classes a week now. And then I started doing some corporate wellness stuff. And then I was also doing freelance marketing work as well. But it gave me a lot more flexibility. So I was kind of doing both. And I was doing that for maybe 2-3 years, where I would have some marketing clients that I was working for on a project basis or a retainer basis, and teaching yoga more and more and more, and getting more involved in that world, making more of a name for myself in that world where we are in the kind of Long Beach, Orange County area. Then COVID happened. And obviously, we all lost a lot of work during that time, but it did allow me to turn my corporate wellness work virtual, and there became more of a demand for it at that time. And so I was doing a lot of that throughout COVID. Then eventually, when we all opened back up, I was able to get the schedule of studio classes that I wanted, and corporate classes had been built. I had built a schedule out of those, and I acquired some private clients. And that's really taken me to where I am now, where I'm only teaching yoga and meditation and all of those kind of modalities.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. So corporate yoga seems like that's, big part of your job now, besides teaching at a studio and maybe private. So I'm curious about corporate yoga. This is a question I get asked a lot from my students or people in my mentorship group or newer teachers. It's like, how do you get the corporate job? How can I find this opportunity? So, and for me, in my small experience, it's always been kind of like word of mouth and networking, knowing the right person who worked at the right company, who knew how to connect me to the right person. And that's kind of how I've been hearing whenever I ask somebody. But yeah, please share with us, like, how did you initially find your corporate opportunities, and how did it grow? Any advice for listeners and yoga teachers listening who are interested in teaching corporate yoga?
Yeah. So the way I have found any routine, regular client has been through networking. And it's not just networking, in the corporate world, networking amongst family and friends, and not forcing it, but just like, hey, I'm acquiring clients right now for yoga or meditation in the corporate space. And someone will go, oh, I think my company would be interested in that, or my husband's company would be interested in that. And then kind of following that thread. It can take a while to get those programs started up. They're often, unfortunately, sort of low priority for a lot of companies. So it can take a while, but just sort of following those threads. And that's, I think, networking really is the most powerful way to get those kind of clients personally. However, there are corporate wellness companies that you could contract with that they acquire clients, and then they set up sessions, and then they'll book you for that session. So, I could be this corporate wellness company, and then I have a handful of clients in LA and Long Beach, and I set up 3 different classes with them. And then I reach out to you, Reika, and go, hey, you're one of our contracted teachers. Are you available for these sessions we just scheduled with these companies? And then that's how you can kind of also break into that world. Those corporate wellness companies, they're kind of like a broker of those classes. So they do take more of a cut of the payment, but it is a good way to sort of integrate in. And I'm actually listed with several of those companies. So every once in a while, I'll get like one-off gigs, more for like wellness events and that sort of thing. But that's also another way into those companies. A piece of advice I would have is to really diversify what you're offering. It doesn't just have to be vinyasa yoga. It can be meditation. It can be mindfulness. It can be a light stretching class. It can be restorative yoga. Whatever you feel comfortable teaching, I suggest kind of offering those options. Now I've really scaled a lot of my corporate wellness work to be very meditation, mindfulness based, which is less taxing on my body. It takes less time to do. It's a little bit more efficient for me and for them. So diversifying the options. And then I would also just say that create a contract or, work with someone who is familiar with contracts to really protect yourself, not from any ramifications or anything like that, but really setting yourself up for success so that clients, if you start like a routine sort of frequency with a company where you have one class a week, like having some sort of contract to where if they try and cancel on you, they have to give you a 30-day notice with full pay or things like that. So they don't just treat you willy-nilly. It's just like, oh, we're just going to cut this and stop paying it right now. Like putting those kind of guardrails in place and really think about yourself as a business in that instance.
That's such a great advice with the protecting yourself and thinking about your yoga teaching or, meditation or whatever your business is as a business. I think that's so important. When I made that switch in my brain of like, okay, this is a business I'm running. Obviously, there's, all the love of yoga and the tradition and lineage and the essence, all of that is there. But I still have to think of it as a business and have like a liability form, agreement form, make sure there's a signature that I get, the intake, the insurance. It makes it so much easier to have created that boundary in the beginning of building a relationship with the company or private client, then later try to reestablish that boundary. It's so much better if you have that already set up and, kind of start off that relationship with like really professional foundation.
And to kind of add to that, I'm 100% with you. I'm all about like, I just love this work so much. I want as many people to benefit from it as possible. Just let me in there. Just let me do it. I don't love the marketing or networking piece of it. I don't love the contractual part of it. I don't like the setting rates. I wish it wasn't like that. But in the timeline that we're in, you do have to think about it in those terms. And it's not coming from a place of greed or scarcity. It's coming from a place of, I need to do this in a way that makes sense for me and protects me and empowers me to give the best possible service to the people that are taking my classes. So if I have these healthy boundaries and that makes me feel secure, then I'm going to feel more empowered in doing the work that I'm doing.
Yes, beautifully said. Okay, I'm curious. You mentioned a little bit of pandemic and about the pandemic. You said you're starting to kind of teach the corporate yoga even before, but then the pandemic kind of changed and you were able to maybe find more clients and people are interested in offering online wellness programs. So I'm curious, how was your life as a teacher before the pandemic? And then what happened during any shift or changes? And how has it shifted now that we're out of the pandemic? How has your, teaching, your business, your life kind of shifted during those phases?
Yeah, that's a great question. Before the pandemic, I was doing a lot. I was teaching in many different studios, pretty spread out, not overly spread out, but, there was big drive times between some of them. And I was teaching a few corporate classes and I was going in person to those classes. So there could be days where it was like, I opened a studio at 5 a.m. and taught a double. And then I went home and showered and scarfed down food. And then I drove to a corporate office in corporate attire to teach a 30-minute meditation class. And then I scarfed down food again and then drove to another studio further away and changed back into yoga clothes to teach another double and then drove home and collapsed on the couch. And then the pandemic happened. And then as for many of us in our line of work, there really wasn't a lot going on. I was teaching a handful of virtual corporate wellness classes and some of the outdoor yoga stuff. And then I was doing some Zoom classes, but it was a much quieter time. And obviously it was a turbulent time for us as a collective, and that had its own unique challenges that I experienced personally as well as a member of the collective. But then coming out of COVID, it really allowed me to go, okay, where do I want to centralize my teaching? What do I want to offer? And it allowed me to center a lot of my studio teaching in Long Beach, where I live. So, that kept that a little bit more manageable. It allowed me to acquire some private clients that I've been working with through the pandemic, just sort of like meeting up at a park outside and kind of stay with them, but set them up on a schedule that worked for them and me. And then all the corporate stuff had gone virtual, and I have really only taken client stints that have allowed me to be virtual because people are still working hybrid. And my sort of marketing for it is that I do the virtual meditation class or yoga class, and people can access it from wherever they are. Maybe they are in the office and they gather some friends and they go in a boardroom and they put me on the TV. Or maybe a few people are working from home that day, so they tune in from home. Also, we record the class so that the company can have it and people can access it anytime after that. And that also makes it a lot more manageable on my end as well, because I have my setup at home, which is what you're seeing right now for these corporate meditation mindfulness classes. And I can kind of stack those because it's all just happening in one place. So coming out of the pandemic and building up to now, it's allowed me to continue to teach full time in a way that feels more sustainable for me energetically and logistically.
That's so fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. I love that, you were able to kind of rearrange your teaching, schedule and life and kind of reprioritize like what is important. And I completely understand when you said like teach it 2 doubles in the morning and try to eat something in between class and go to the next thing and shower in between. And you have like, okay, 1 hour dead time that you're like, what am I going to do now for 1 hour? And it's like, okay, now go commute to the next place and teach another 3 more classes. And I totally get that. And I know a lot of yoga teachers have lived that kind of schedule, and maybe many still live that schedule. So I feel you on all the people who have that kind of schedule. And I know you said you teach more in virtual now, and I know you teach online. So maybe can you kind of in general, I'm sure week to week your schedule is probably different, but kind of like in general ballpark, like how many classes in person are you teaching now versus how many like meditation online you teach versus like private, or like what are different, I guess, streams of income that you have now? What does your typical, I guess, week would look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I have 7 studio classes in person at Raw Yoga Long Beach, little plug there for those in the area. And then I have 1 Raw Yoga live stream class for our live stream platform that I do. So you could kind of consider that 8 studio classes, if you will. And then I teach for 2 to 3, sometimes 4 private sessions a week. And half of those are in person, half of those are online. And then I'm currently with 3 corporate clients and maybe acquiring more shortly here. I think like the max I can really take on is like 8 would be pushing it, but kind of like 5 is, I would say, like the happy range for me in addition to all of the studio and private classes that I have. So yeah, it's kind of in thirds where it's like a third of it is studio, a third of it is corporate, and a third of it is private in terms of my time as well as my income is divided into thirds in that way.
Thank you for sharing that. Have you, maybe with trials and errors, have you been able to create a healthy boundary for yourself with teaching as your full-time thing? Like, I think I spoke to Karen before where she's like, these are the days that I don't teach. Like, I make sure I don't book anything on these days. Is my day off. Or some people like, I don't teach after this time, or book a massage, whatever it is. Have you been able to create like a healthy boundary for yourself so that you don't burn out from teaching?
That's a great question. I love that you asked that because I'm sure a lot of people wonder about that and need to be empowered to set boundaries. I'm a boundary bitch. Like, I am big on my boundaries. I love boundaries. I've considered writing a book about boundaries. I've read books about boundaries. I love boundaries. So yes, I have done that. I don't teach after 6:30 really because I'm more of an early bird. After 6:30, I really can't do anything. I don't teach on Sundays unless it's I taught this past Sunday for a teacher training lecture, but that's like very rare. But I don't accept classes on Sundays. I always try and make sure I have 2 days off. Right now, my days off are Saturday, Sunday. I work Monday through Friday, a little bit more traditionally. And I try to be really good about not subbing classes on those days. Of course, every once in a while I will. But yeah, I try and make sure I have those 2 days off. I don't teach after a certain time. And there are times during the week where I won't sub a class because that is my practice time or that is my workout time. And I mean, if someone was throwing up in front of me and like, I can't teach this class, of course I would go in and teach it for them at that time. But, I try and make myself unavailable at that time. Just because I'm free doesn't mean I'm available. Yeah.
Definitely. I totally agree because my God, I think pandemic has also helped me kind of reprioritize what's important. And I realize I don't want to be teaching like 30 classes a week anymore. I want to prioritize. And so it has shifted my schedule and priority since the pandemic. But I'm slowly seeing myself getting like pulled back into this like busy teaching schedule again. So I know you said you love talking about the boundary. You want to write a book on it. And I love hearing and asking questions from people who have such a healthy boundary. So maybe, I don't know, a couple tips for yoga teachers, because I think it's so common for yoga teachers to go through this time of like hustle. And not to say that it's wrong, because I feel like maybe those times were necessary for me to grow as a teacher, but definitely don't want to be in that stage anymore for me. And yeah, like I get a lot of questions about how to prevent burnout. How do I make sure I set a better boundary? So any helpful tips you can give for yoga teachers who might be struggling?
Yeah. Well, first of all, so much love to everyone who does what we do, because we do it from the heart. We are benefiting a lot of people with our work. I don't say that in an arrogant, postural way. I say that in a way of honoring that we do put our heart and soul into what we do. And we know that there are physical, psychological, and spiritual benefits to what we do. I would say get really clear about what you're like, look at the spectrum of what is an absolutely yes, what is an absolutely no. And then in between there, we'll kind of tell you what your boundaries are. So what is like your ideal schedule? What are the formats you would love to teach? What are the places you would love to teach for? That is kind of the aspirational, this is what I'm going for. And then what are the absolutely nots? That the formats, the classes, the times, the places, the working environments that if it was offered to you, your gut reaction is absolutely not. Honor that gut reaction and don't talk yourself into it. And that gives you a really good baseline of, okay, here's an absolutely not. That answer to that is always going to be no. And then what is right by there? What is next to the absolutely not? Where it's kind of like, okay, my gut feeling is no, but maybe. And then determine, okay, what actually should stay in the no category and what would be okay for being a maybe. And I think kind of, getting clear about your spectrum of absolutely not versus absolutely yeses can be helpful in determining what your personal boundaries are, because it's going to be different for all of us, right? Some people have, they're like, I can totally teach 30 classes a week and I'm like totally fine with that. And others of us are like, I can't teach past this point. Getting really clear about that. I also want to acknowledge that there is privilege in being able to say no. And I recognize my privilege in that because I make a certain amount per class with the rates that I have gotten myself to, I can say no to certain things and I don't have to be in that scarcity mentality. Not to say that I don't have times that are leaner than others, that I don't struggle. I'm not bringing in millions of dollars here, but I have gotten it to a point where I don't have to teach as much to make the amount that I do now. Like early on in my career, I would have to be teaching, double the amount that I am now to make what I do now, so that there is privilege in that. And so with that, what I would say for instructors is, can you build a little bit of a nest egg or savings for yourself so that in those tough moments where you're like, God, I'm so tired, I don't think I can teach another class, you could say no and know that you have that backing? Or are there other things outside of yoga that you could be doing that bring you some income that doesn't necessarily have to be big, but helps you find that security? Going back to when I first took the leap from the corporate world, I still had some marketing stuff going on. Not that that was ultimately what I wanted to be doing all the time, but I had that as kind of like, okay, at least that income is there. So I think part of the boundary setting is getting yourself into a place where you feel secure enough. And I think there's a mindset with that too, right? I think a lot of us do get caught up in like, if I say no to this class they're offering me at this studio, they'll never ask me again. And moving away from that and being like, you know what? If it's in alignment, they'll come back with more. And if it's a no there, it's a yes somewhere else, and just kind of trusting in that.
Yes, thank you for that. I love the, first figuring out your absolute yes and absolute no, and then knowing that there's just a gray area in between, but knowing those two, I guess, like end of the spectrum, and kind of thinking about your ideal schedule. What would it look like if you can have exactly the schedule you want? And yeah, I love that. I'll definitely be hearing that back when I'm editing and thinking a little journaling exercise as I'm hearing you do that. And I know you also have YouTube, you had your podcast. And so I'm curious, how do you balance this kind of content creation that may help your business in the long run, or maybe it helps in some way? It may not be monetary gain, especially in the beginning. So how have you found like balancing your actual teaching hours, going to studio, having private, going to corporate, and then also like in the back end, this kind of like content creation that may have a benefit later, but it's not a guarantee. So like, how have you found a way to balance that in your schedule?
Yeah, well, the honest answer is that I'm not doing a lot of content creation at present. And I think when I was doing a lot more content creation was because I had more time at that time. What I will say is that the light content creation that I do now and the admin work that people don't realize goes into what we do, if you're an independent contractor, you have to factor in making sure you're tracking your expenses and creating your invoices, as well as planning classes and making playlists. Those are all working hours, right? So I really like to see those hours of when I'm doing that as this isn't free work. This is kind of built into my rate. And this is a working hour right now. I'm spending an hour doing my expenses for the month and writing out my invoices that I'm sending to the companies that pay me through invoice. That is working hour. Monday mornings is when I plan my classes for the week. That's a working hour, and of building those into my schedule for the week. When I look over, here are the class times, these are the physical times I have to be somewhere, be logged in to provide a class, and then choosing, okay, these are the hours for planning, admin, and or content creation. And even if it's not necessarily that you have a dollar amount attached to that hour, still seeing those as working hours and treating them as such, I think is really helpful to provide structure.
Yes, thank you for saying that. It is true. We there's a lot of hours we're putting in to prepare the class. All the email back and forth, or writing invoices. There's a lot of work that goes in that's beyond what I guess maybe typically people may see.
Mm-hmm.
We usually just get paid for that 1 hour, one class rate, but there's actually a lot more work that goes in behind the scene.
100%. And that is why, I empower people when they feel it's time for a raise, ask for that raise and justify it, that I plan my classes, I execute them well, I put a lot of time and energy into it. Because it's not just that hour that you're there. It's everything that leads up to it so that you can do that hour really well. And so, that's something I'm really big on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Kind of changing slightly topic from business side to more like the yoga world. Thing I've been thinking a lot lately is I'm noticing some trend or change in the yoga world, especially in LA, because that's where I live and we both live. So I don't know too much how the yoga world is changing or shifting or evolving in another country or another state. But what have you noticed since you've been in the yoga world? Are some changes that's been happening, and what are some changes that you're excited about, and some changes that you're kind of hesitant to see, or maybe it sads you to see it over time? I feel like last 5-10 years, especially maybe after the pandemic, there's some changes happening in the yoga world. So what have you noticed, and what do you enjoy, and what are you more hesitant about?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think I have a variety of answers for you if you're good with it. So, I'll start with something that I'm excited about or happy about. I think we're doing a much better job. At least, again, I think it is important to note that, it is a regional thing to a certain degree because we are in one place and we're seeing things mostly in our place, as well as online, which kind of gives you a read of what's happening elsewhere. But I guess really speaking to yoga in California, as well as maybe the US, I do think there is an evolution of trying to include more people in the practice, both teachers and practitioners. I do think that there has been an evolution to styles that are offered so that more people can come based on, what their needs are. There are more chair yoga classes or accessible yoga classes like you teach. There's different levels. There's more, the practice itself. I feel like there's a lot more care being placed on each posture and like, okay, what are the modifications or the customization so that we could adapt the practice for someone else. I do think that there's more of a movement for making yoga more accessible to more people of color, different body types, different expressions. I really love that at Raw Yoga Long Beach in particular, we're really supportive of that. You have Sunny Davis, who's a dear teacher friend of ours. She's empowered to lead a workshop for teachers of color. There is more of a movement to hire more teachers of color and of different backgrounds. That's all good. The diversification of teachers and practitioners, I think, is a positive thing that is happening. One thing I do think continues that is sort of like a trend culturally for teachers specifically is that I do still think that there is this expectation of perfection that is put on teachers still. It's being challenged more, which I think is good. But I do feel that a lot of people, once they learn you are an instructor of yoga, meditation, mindfulness, or all of the above, automatically put you into a box. And that box is, well, then you need to be always calm. Your personality needs to be kind of muted and subdued. You can't be too loud. You can't experience the full spectrum of human emotions, nothing below mild disappointment and nothing above slightly pleasant. You can't curse. You have to eat vegan. You can't have alcohol. And if you ever lose your cool or you ever show more of a human side, then you're invalidated as being in the role that you're in. And that is something I really push back on. I think that caricature of a teacher or a spiritual person is really limiting. It limits one from having the full human experience. It encourages one to sort of disassociate from society as opposed to engaging in society. It actually discourages diversity in the space. It discourages diversity of personalities, of expression, of authentic voice. And so I really push back on that. And we are humans, all of us. And I think that there's something really beautiful about a very humble human instructor connecting with very humble human students. And like, hey, we're all in this together. I'm just sharing what I know with you. And I'm trying to lead by example. And guess what? I don't get it right all of the time. I lose my cool. I curse. I might flip someone off on the freeway, but I'm aware that I want to, behave in a better way than that. Or I'm aware that I'm also in this process of growth. So that is something that I really push back on. Another trend that I think I see happening that I would like to challenge too is that, and maybe this has always been there, really seeing yoga as just physical movement. I think that has always been there to a certain degree, but more and more I feel like I'm starting to see studios and gyms. It's just deep house yoga and you just come in and get right into down dog and you just go, and there's no mention of breath. There's no mention of any sort of intention or theme or philosophical concept. And at that point, it's kind of just a yogic movement class. And listen, I teach very fitness forward classes. I teach with loud music. It could be a disco class, it could be a deep house class, But I do still want to encourage teachers to include connection to breath and to include an introduction to something beyond just the body, right? And there is value in just like get out of your mind and into your body, but also, what are those different themes and concepts we could be bringing in that we practice on the mat that we can then take with us outside of the practice as well? So that's something I kind of want to challenge as well. What about you? What are your observations?
I've been thinking a lot about this lately. And I think what I'm noticing, and this is again from my world, which is Southern California, and even I, get to speak and interview teachers from different parts. I think what I'm seeing mostly close to me in the Southern California is that I think during maybe 90s and early 2000s, maybe in LA, there was a lot of yoga studio that just offered yoga. And it was maybe like room temperature yoga. It wasn't even hot yoga back then. And they were just so focused on that. This is yoga school. We teach yoga. We teach this technique or blah, blah, blah. And now I'm noticing yoga studios that only offers yoga there aren't that many left. There aren't that many mom and pop's yoga studio left or yoga schools. It's becoming more yoga is one of the movement modalities that's offered under the one umbrella or one roof. So a lot of places, I think it's almost hard to survive. This is, I could be wrong, but this is what I'm noticing is I think it's as a business, it's becoming harder to survive if you don't offer something more than yoga in the schedule, whether that's yoga lattes, yoga with weights, dumbbell, HIIT class, spin class, or maybe Pilates, reformer classes, and also heat. I think heat is so popular that I'm seeing a lot of non-heated studio not do well, or they have to start offering heated classes for the business to continue to make enough money to sustain itself. So I'm noticing there's more movement into fitness, which is not a bad thing at all. I love taking fitness classes, but I'm also seeing that it's maybe less people are interested in just yoga and they want yoga to be one of the things that they do, but not the whole. So now a lot of places I've seen are like offering more than yoga classes, and yoga is just like a section of the offering rather than the full. And that's what it seems like it's doing well. And places that just offer yoga seems to be becoming smaller, or I'm seeing those places close down.
Yeah, that is, now that you say that, I realize what you're saying, I think is pretty true, at least in our region, right? And it's complex in that I think a lot of people are realizing, or students are realizing, like it's healthy to have different forms of movement, but then that translates to, and therefore I want any place that I invest my monthly resources into to give me a variety of classes. And I get that 100%. And, we teach for a studio that offers various formats. And I think that's beautiful. And it allows us teachers who teach multiple formats to have more classes back to back, which is efficient and all of that. But I do really want to preserve the sacredness of a very yoga forward space. Studios that, even if they're offering different formats, like having yoga really be the lead, really be the head of that studio. And yeah, I think that's really important. And I think that just kind of speaks to where we are, which is a much bigger conversation as an economy, right? Like it's harder for us to survive as businesses and individuals. And again, we're talking about like not operating in scarcity mentality, but there is a reality of, it is hard to make it. And to make it, you have to do these things or offer these things. And, I hope we can evolve our societal structure to be in such a way that it isn't so difficult to do absolutely everything, right? Like we could have a much more harmonious society where people can do more of what they love at a much easier pace. We're not realizing that as a collective. So we've got a lot of work to do.
Yeah. And I think there's another trend I'm seeing is since the pandemic, there's a lot more online offerings, online trainings, online teacher trainings, online yoga classes. And a lot of hybrids also being offered, which I think is one side, it's so amazing because it makes it accessible. Now people don't have to drive 1 hour to get to a studio and look for parking. Or maybe like for me, I take classes from my teacher, Annie Carpenter, who lives in Northern California, but I get to take her classes Zoom live every, a few times a week. So which has made this possible since the pandemic and a lot of things switching online. But I'm noticing, I don't know if you noticed this, I think there's less people willing to commit to in-person experiences anymore. Like we used to be week-long training. People would fly from different places, come take this week-long training from this teacher or teacher training. Every weekend we meet or every other weekend we meet. And now because there's so much online offering or hybrid offering, people are less willing to then maybe take time off from work or commit to driving to the studio for a 3 days weekend for this training or 10-day, 5-day training. More people they're interested in, is it going to be recorded? Can I watch the recording later? So, which is like, there's pros and cons. It's so positive. But I'm also seeing like less people even willing to commit to fully in-person 200-hour teacher trainings anymore because there's so much online options out there. So I feel a little bit saddened by the fact that we're kind of losing this like in-person training culture that we really love. But at the same time, I do also love that there's online options available,
Yeah. I hear you there. I feel a similar conflict because I love some online formats for certain things where it makes sense. If I were to go back to school for something, I would only go back online, not in yoga. Just like if I were to go back to like university to pursue a master's or something, I would be like, I have to do it online because I like to kind of manage my time in that way. But, I hope people realize the magic of in-person workshops and trainings and that sometimes that is really worth it to go for that. And again, like we said, we understand for some people, maybe someone is a single mom and she's got 2 babies at home and she wants to continue her yoga education. It's like, I just can't get away for 5 days. Like I need to be able to log on when I can and get the hours in. And that's great. I love that that's an option for her. But there is a magic when it comes to trainings and workshops of going in person and like making a trip out of it if you can. Let's say it was a studio in San Diego. It's like, it's like 3-day training. Let's go down. We'll book an Airbnb. Like a few of us teachers from up here are going and we'll make a weekend out of it. And we'll be really tired at the end, but we'll have all these like great experience and a training done afterwards. So yeah, I'm with you there.
Yeah. Thank you for having this conversation with me because it's been on my mind a lot. And this is maybe more questions I want to start asking the people I interview. So yeah, I really love this conversation. So I have a few more questions to kind of wrap up. First, what do you love the most about being a full-time yoga teacher? And obviously meditation is all that included in that. And what do you find it most challenging?
Great question. Obviously, I just love the work so much. I have so much fun with it. When I'm teaching, it does not feel like work. I feel really alive. I feel really in alignment with what I believe to be my purpose in this lifetime. There are times when I'm teaching where I really just feel like this energetic lock to something higher, where it's like, okay, yeah, this is part of my purpose in this lifetime. I'm living out the purpose and I feel such power and magic in that. I love seeing the impact of my work. And again, I don't say that in an arrogant way. I say that in a humble way that I'm so honored to be able to do this work and that my work is received in such a positive way and to be able to know that I'm helping people, whether it's mentally or physically or energetically or all of the above, like to be able to help people, that is just such an honor. So that is absolutely my favorite part. Another great perk, the flexibility of it. I've arranged my schedule to be in a way that works for me at present. You can kind of take off when you want to take off. All of that is a great perk of the job. The more challenging side of it is that I wish it wasn't so hard to make it as a full-time instructor. And I'm comfortable. I'm doing well for myself by my own standards. That I wish it wasn't such a hustle and a grind. And I know that that is the case for a lot of teachers to where it becomes unfeasible. especially if you're providing for more than yourself. I don't have children, so I'm only providing for myself and my dog. So that makes it a lot easier. So my hope is that we can get to a place where full-time instructors, not just of yoga, but of all different modalities of movement, all those formats, can feel secure and that they're earning a good wage, they have access to healthcare, they can afford housing, and have some discretionary income on top of that. That's where I really hope we move to. But kind of the more challenging aspect is that it can be hard. There is a security factor, especially when you have privates and clients, because they can kind of go in and out. So that is definitely the more challenging aspect of it.
Yeah, definitely. I completely relate with you. I interviewed a teacher who lives in Germany, and she's a full-time teacher, and she told me that the healthcare system in Germany subsidize people to take yoga classes. So,
Wow.
but then there's like a little application process as a yoga teacher you have to go through. She said that you have to be like 500 hour certified yoga teacher instead of 200. And you have to have a certain number of hours of teaching experience, and you have to kind of show and prove that. But once you do that and they approve you, then you get on this like list of people that offer yoga classes that people can come take, and they can have like government subsidized all that money. So that is one way that she leads her own group classes. She rents a space in a community center, and that's kind of how she gets people to come in and join. And that would be so amazing if the U.S. government or, our system was set up in that way that allowed, more people accessibility to take yoga classes, but also offered more security for teachers to find students and earn their income.
I love that so much. Thank you for sharing that. I think a lot of people should listen to that and think about the possibilities and realize that what is now need not always be. We are capable of evolution. We've evolved in so many ways. As a global society, we can continue to evolve. And I would really like to push for that evolution. I'm a big believer in terms of our industry that anyone doing this work in a full-time capacity should earn a wage that affords them housing with ease, reasonable housing with ease, have access to healthcare, be able to afford food, and have some discretionary income. I also believe that instructors should be entitled to paid sick time, paid vacation time, and a pension, actually. And I have a lot of different reasons for that we could get into, but I don't have all the answers for how that could be implemented. Is it unionization? Is it some sort of state-funded program? Is it just the private industry moving in that direction and setting better standards for instructors across the board? I don't have all the answers, but I don't need all the answers to know that instructors should be guaranteed more security than they are, and to believe that better is possible.
Mm-hmm. Oh my God. Yes. To all of that you said, I 100% agree with you that we deserve all of that. And yeah, hopefully our society can move towards that direction. And if you decide to lead this movement, just let me know. I'll be there.
Okay. I might call on you. It very well could be, because I think we've all got to be leaders in some way in this time to move us forward in that positive direction.
Yes. That brings me to the next question that I know you, like every year, I think I saw you and Karen do a workshop that is a fundraising workshop that you raise money for a specific cause. And I know on your podcast, you really have purpose and intention to the topic you bring and discuss, and the message you have that is more than just, teaching yoga as an asana physical form. There's a drive behind on how you want to have a positive impact in the world. So where does that drive come from? And what are some, tips or advices you want to give to yoga teachers that we can actually make a positive impact? Not only just earn money for ourselves, but societally, we can raise money, we can do fundraising. There's so much way we can make impact in this world and society. So I think that's such an important part that I studied sociology for my undergrad and my master's, and I used to want to work for nonprofit. now I became a yoga teacher, but I'm always figuring out a way to combine these two different but similar paths. How can I still earn money and give back at the same time? How can I make a positive impact in the world? So I love when I see other yoga teachers who also are doing that and are aware of that and wanting to make a positive impact. So maybe can you, I don't know, share a little bit about the drive that you have?
That is such a beautiful question. Thank you for asking that and for your kind words and observations. You know, again, it goes back to why I left a career that maybe would have been more secure or afforded me a different tax bracket. But I really wanted to see the impact of my work, and I was seeing that already as a teacher. So I just wanted more of that. And I guess there's a sort of spiritual level where I believe that if we are putting good out there, it is going to land and it is going to resonate with people. I've been lucky enough to receive feedback from students that, you know, my classes helped them achieve a fitness goal that was important for their health, or that it helped them with their mental health, or it helped them get through like a really hard time. And that's just me, right? I know every teacher is having some sort of impact in that way. And I believe that every little drop in the pond that we make ripples outward. So kind of at a spiritual, energetic level, I believe that all of us, when our hearts are in it and we're wanting to do good, that is rippling out there in some way, shape, or form. So if you are teaching right now, like, believe you're already doing good. In terms of giving back, yoga and meditation, they're both formats or modalities that people want to participate in and people want to invest in. And because of that, I think there's such a vast range of opportunities for us to kind of plug yoga and meditation into events and programs that do raise money to give back, right? Sometimes that could look like just offering a free class to a certain community so that people have access to the practice and get to experience it, but don't have to pay for it because, you know, they're low means or whatever it might be. Sometimes it could be doing a donation class where you donate 100% of the proceeds to a cause like Karen and I do every Valentine's Day. Or if it's like, well, I still need to make some money, it could be like you create a special class and it's like a portion of the proceeds will be donated and you like make the rate that you want to make. And then anything above that gets donated out. I think there's also lots of different nonprofits and organizations that are like, oh, we're doing this event. And it can be like, oh, I want to contribute to that event. I'll donate my time or I'll do it for this rate and I'll help draw in people so that you can raise money to, you know, dedicate resources to this cause or this organization. I think that is a beautiful piece of what we do. We already want to help people. And then in the world that we're in, kind of using these practices or these modalities that we teach as a means to then sometimes contribute and do a little bit more than what we're already doing.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. And I love all the different ways, examples you gave of how it may look like. And there's just so many ways that we can come up with, of like whether it's a percentage or whether it's a time you volunteer. There's so many ways that we could be contributing in whatever way and the cause that we believe in. So I love seeing that, and with you and Karen partnering up, and whenever I see that with other teachers, I think it's so amazing to see that. So I really love that you care and you are offering your service to the whole society. So I appreciate that so much.
Thank you.
And what kind of advice would you give your younger teacher self now that you're looking back at your journey? Is there any advice you would give to yourself as maybe a young teacher, or it could be like somebody who's brand new to teaching yoga that you would give advice to?
That's a great question. I think I would say to my younger self, which would also be the same as saying to maybe new teachers, release perfectionism. And I know maybe that's a cliche thing to say. We're all about moving away from perfectionism, but when I first started teaching, I was very about, I need to have the perfect sequence and the perfect cues and say the the theme in the absolute perfect way. I can't ever say an I can't ever mess up. The playlist has to be perfect. The music has to start at the exact right point, and just release all of that. Show up authentically. Do the best you can. Know that your best is not always going to be 100%, but if your best that day was 60% and you gave 60%, then really you did give 100% because you gave all you had. And it's okay for it to be organic and imperfect as long as the heart and soul is in it. That's what really counts. And so that's what I would also share with newer teachers out there, or someone who's still attached to perfectionism.
I love that. That was so beautiful. I'm sure me included, listening to them, like, yeah, definitely. That's a great advice. And I guess the final wrapping up question is like, where do you see your teaching, your yoga journey, could be where your business is going in the future? Like, where is there certain things that you want to do or you want to take your teaching towards? Could be a goal. Not everybody likes the word goals, but you have a direction you want to take your teaching path to.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I would love to participate in more teacher training programs as a guest lecturer. I'm moving into the retreat world. So I have a retreat coming up with Eleni, who we teach with. It's sold out, so I'm not going to overly plug it here. But if I enjoy doing that retreat, it's my first ever retreat. So as long as I like actually doing it, I plan to do more retreats in the future. And I would love to move into international retreats as well as local retreats. This retreat that we have coming up, Eleni is Greek and I'm Italian. And so we're kind of going with a very Mediterranean theme. And I think the vision is that eventually we would start to do retreats in the Mediterranean itself. So that's definitely a vision that I have for my future teaching. And I'm also a writer. I'm not doing a lot in the present or in recent years that people have seen, but there is a lot of work going on behind the scenes. And a lot of that work is related to yoga and mindfulness and spirituality and all of that. And so the vision is that there will be some publishing happening. And within that, there will be additional resources of inspiration for teachers. And so that is that's a big one on the vision board, if you will. So, yeah.
Oh my God. I know. I noticed that you said you love writing. And I think you said that a couple times during this interview. So that's great. Well, in the future, I believe there'll be something coming up from you. And I know you said boundaries. I can write a book on it. So definitely boundaries. I would love to read about boundaries. That's a great tip. I think a lot of yoga teachers need. But that's so amazing. I'll be looking forward to that. And I think if writing, it sounds like you're passionate about and that brings you joy. So it's nice that you can combine your passion for writing and passion for yoga. I'm excited to see what it'll come up to be in the future. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time, Johnny. I really appreciated us chatting and I feel like I got to know you more. And, a lot of these discussions went to the places that I really enjoyed having the conversation with other yoga teachers about. I think this podcast selfishly allowed me to have like a deep one-on-one conversation with other full-time yoga teachers, which I love doing because we see each other passing by, we say hi, we might see each other at an event or something with other teachers, but it's very rare to have like sit down, deep conversation with other full-time teachers. So I really appreciated this. Can you please share with the listeners how they can find you? And also if there's anything upcoming you want to share, any plug, just let the listeners know.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you again so much for having me. I've loved chatting with you. I want to chat with you further because this is an interview where you're interviewing me, but I want to hear even more about you because like you were sharing with everyone, Reika and I know each other. We see each other every once in a while, but we haven't gotten to connect too much. So this has been a great connection, but I want more of a connection where I get to interview you. And I just love talking to you, your voice, my God, like just like a soothing balm and cup of tea. Like you're so wonderful to listen to. So yeah, I need you to teach some online meditation classes so I can just like take your meditations. But this has been an amazing conversation. In terms of where people can find me, I'm on Instagram, Johnny LaPasta. I have a website, johnnylapasta.com. I'm actually going to be redoing that pretty soon, but there's a lot of stuff on there. Some of my writing, some yoga information and content. I have a YouTube channel, Johnny LaPasta YouTube, and I haven't done much with that in recent years, but I do have classes available for people to take, as well as some tutorials for different poses and transitions for teachers who are looking for inspiration. And I can't fully plug this yet because it isn't fully developed, but I do want to put the teaser out there that, speaking of contracts and corporate clients and private clients, I'm kind of working on something behind the scenes that will be a resource for teachers when they do go to set up client relationships. So keep an eye out for that, because I think it'll be a really valuable resource when I and the person I'm working with get done with that. And also keep an eye out for future retreats, because again, I think that's going to be more part of my career moving forward.
Yes, thank you so much. What you said about having resources for yoga teachers with like a contract to negotiate with corporate clients, that is such an important and needed and necessary resources out there for yoga teachers. So I hope you get that resources out, and that'll help a lot of people, I think, to even have like a sample format to follow.
Yeah, I hope so. That's really the intention. And it's like, you know, when I release it, it's not even going to be something that like me and this business partner I'm working on, like we don't even hope to make that much. I'm just like, I've been through situations in the past. Again, you kind of learn on the job. And I'm kind of like, I do not want this happening to other people. Like, I need to get this out there so people don't have these kind of situations as much.
Yes, totally. Thank you for doing that work. I look forward to seeing it in the future. Thank you so much, Johnny, for your time today. Really appreciate it. And I'm very excited I get to share this conversation with the listeners very soon.
Thank you so much, Reika. I really, really appreciate you.
I hope you enjoyed listening to our conversation. I really enjoyed having this conversation with Johnny. Like I said earlier, I feel like I got to know him a little bit more and deeper in his stories and journeys that he have gone through to be where he's at. He also left us with a really great tips about boundaries and also working with corporate clients. And I also love that we got to talk a little bit about where the yoga industry or yoga world is headed and some of the changes and shifts that we've been seeing as we continue to evolve with the yoga industry, with the yoga world. So I hope you enjoyed this week's conversation. If you want to reach out to me, give me feedback or comment about the podcast, you can always write me directly on Instagram at Reika Yoga. Or you can also write me on my podcast, www.reikayoga.com. And I will be leaving the links to the Yoga and Sound workshop that Carlos and I will be leading in March, April, and May. And like always, I always appreciate if you could leave us 5 stars or a rating or subscribe or like or anything that you can do on whatever platform you listen to this podcast. And I also love when I see my listeners sharing this podcast on social media, or maybe you're sharing it to your friends and coworkers. So please share this podcast if you enjoyed it, and I will speak to you next week. Have a great day.